joining us. So my name is Debbie Forster. I'm the CEO of the Tech Talent Charter, and welcome to our forum today. This is a chance for us to dig into not just what is best practice, what is emerging good practice, to hear about works in progress, to share where the pain points are, to share where the breakthroughs are, and to try and move things forward. We're joined today by Julian Miles of the Women Returners Program. And Julian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, Debbie, thank you so much for inviting me.
Julian is a figure in the space. You were doing returners before returners was a thing, weren't you? How long have you been doing this?
Absolutely were. So nearly 9 years now.
Wow.
So it was a bit of a inspiration I had when I was sitting at home, very much sort of starting the organization around the kitchen table.
Yeah.
And building it all from there.
And that's becoming, and I think about back when we started 6 or 7 years ago for the Tech Talent Charter, returners is something you've heard along the fringes. And quite often when people thought about returner programs, it was most often just about bringing somebody straight back from maternity leave. But we've really thrown that open. And I think understanding within the tech industry has expanded. And I have to say, when I look across and hear from our signatories, one area that comes up again and again are these returner programs, because it does have some advantages that we'll talk about today, as opposed to traditional grad programs or retraining programs. And so it is and isn't part of what we would consider those alternative routes into tech that are rapidly becoming routes into tech. And that's what we want to dig into today. So Julian, you've got a wealth of experience of this across a number of sectors, but we're going to focus particularly in tech. If I'm new to the space and I want to really understand what I mean by returners, are there any barriers for career returners? Are there any specific challenges for tech?
I think there are many challenges for all employers to bring in returners, just as there are many challenges for the returners themselves. And I think it's important to recognize what those challenges are and to say there are barriers. There are barriers for hiring managers, there are barriers for returners. Let's acknowledge those and actually lower them and tackle them. And that's what we've been all about since inception. It's not pretending it's easy bringing returners. However, making the case it is incredibly worthwhile, as well as the right thing for organizations to do. So that's what we're doing. So I think the biggest challenge internally is it's a different form of experienced hire. And I think now even employers of most sizes, they used to bringing in graduates, maybe used to bring in apprentices, and then they're used to bringing in experienced hires. But actually this form of experienced hire who have experience, but who have been out of doing the professional role, it can be 2 years, it can be 10 years. We've actually got a returner now back after 30 years, which
Wow.
is our who's now absolutely thriving back with the leading employer. So I think I can go into more detail on the challenges, but I think the crux of it is it's a different form of experienced hire. You need to do it a bit differently. You need to look at all stages of your recruitment, your onboarding, and not throw them out the window, but tweak and adapt them for returners. And also understand what a journey it is for somebody who has been on career break for a long period of time to get themselves back, ready, confident, both on that journey back to work, but also particularly those first 6 months when they're back at work.
Okay, so I'm hearing, if I'm thinking about it as a company, and I think you're right that it is quite complex, and we need to think about not just what it means for returners in general, but within our own company. Exactly. But to really sit down, to look at that whole process, and we'll break that down in more and more of the thing, but it is about the recruitment may be different, the onboarding may be different, the support may be different. And that's internally, that's not just from them and their perspective, but from our own. But why is that important? So how do before I take that on that journey, if it does feel hard and different, we know that's, recruiting managers, that's the last thing they want on their plate. That's the last thing that a manager wants in their team.
Yeah.
Why is it important? How does it help the D&I engine? And why should I go after that?
Yeah. I think from a D&I perspective, it's a part of the solution. And as we know, in tech, there are so many different pieces to the diversity solution. I think a huge amount of work is done at bringing women and actually people from all forms of diverse backgrounds into tech. However, when we get to those mid-levels, people who left have not traditionally been welcomed back in. And I think that's the gap that we aim to fill. What is hugely dispiriting is how many women there are out there. And we are primarily talking about women here, although I have to say that all of the returner programs we work on are open to all genders. And there are some men coming back in, which is fantastic. But the primary group of people here is women who've taken long career breaks for childcare, for elder care. But, for the broader population, it could be for health, it could be relocation, all these reasons. When you step out, you can't get back in. And these can be, often it's those women who are like, I was one of a few women on, I was doing my computer science course, they were one of the early people in software development, whatever it is. And they were hugely in demand until the point they got that gap on their CV. And then suddenly nobody was interested. They were trying to get back into the sector when they were ready to come back in, and they didn't get anywhere. So it's a massive waste of skills, talent. It's something as a sector that needs to be addressed. It's something as society we need to address. And I think underpinning this is it's the right thing for employers to do, for society, for communities. There's a huge disadvantaged group out there that has been largely neglected until all the work that we have built on and other organizations have been building on over the last sort of 9 years or so. So I think this combination of it's a great talent pool, so and a diverse talent pool, and we can talk about the different forms of diversity in more detail. But also it's the right thing for employers to be doing. So, fantastic actually opportunity in that it's great for the business, but it's also the right thing to do.
And I think, I'm pleased that you looked at the area of age as well, because I think we are getting some employers, they are starting to look at this more. We're going to be publishing our report on the 1st of March. And one of the things we are seeing is that companies are starting to rethink and think about age, etc. But it's more effort, but I think eyes are opening. And I also think the time is coming. We know in last year's report, when companies were talking about their greatest pain points, finding women in senior and mid roles is a huge pain point. And one of the only ways they're going to fix that is to think about things like returner programs. So let's imagine then I've managed to get my C-suite on board. I've got some line managers that are ready to take the plunge, some recruiting managers that are ready to think differently. So if I'm going to start considering setting up a program, what are the most important things I should start considering from the start?
And I think, that point that you said there, which is that's often one of the hardest bits, is getting effectively this sort of triangle of groups within an organization involved. You need senior leadership, you need hiring managers, and you need HR, particularly recruitment, but also L&D. So that's the sort of triangle.
Okay, so get your holy triumvirate. Get our triangle in place is the first thing. On board, ready to work together. Exactly. All right, check.
So you start there. Then the next stage is this aspect of thinking through all aspects of your recruitment, from how do you advertise to returners? How do you actually reach returners? How do you think about the application process so it works for people who've had a long career break? Very importantly, how do you think about the assessment? Because traditionally, and again, with a tech lens on it, so much technical tech, interviewing doesn't work for somebody who doesn't have recent experience. But on the other hand, you need to make the interviewing robust enough that your hiring manager can feel they're getting in the right people. So how do you get that balance? How do you make that work? And then once you get the people through the door, how can you then support them? Because that's the first step. You get them in, but then it can be pretty wobbly emotional transition when somebody comes back. And I think we're all aware of when you start a new job, typically you do get that imposter syndrome, don't you? Sort of a month in, you're like, I can't do this, this is all too hard, I'm not up to it. Think about that feeling, and that is absolutely magnified when you've had a long career break.
And it's almost worse, isn't it, June? Because I think we're talking about people who at some stage had competence, had confidence, and it's different from newcomers, learning to ride a bike the first time. It's returning to a bike and thinking, oh God, can I still, and having an acute awareness of what falling off a bike feels like. So it is almost more painful than that imposter syndrome of someone who's completely new. There's nothing more frustrating than being in a room you used to be able to own, and finding that you're the newbie, finding that you're behind on something.
Yeah. And often it's the thought of that. And what we find again from returners is, once they've done these things for the first time, once you've managed your first meeting again, once you've done your first presentation, whatever it is that's making you nervous, you probably still go through the beating yourself up. You didn't do it as well as you could have done, but you start to get that confidence.
Yeah, because it's like the bike, isn't it? And I think this is important for us to remember and build that in. But it's something that's key to DE&I, isn't it? In the old way of thinking, you only ever thought, what does the business need? What does the manager need? How do we make them fit our needs? Good inclusive leadership that gets the most from people thinks about the human on the other side of that desk and really starts to know, what do they need in order to thrive?
Yeah. And that benefits the business, because I think if you give people that support, they actually integrate faster, they get up to speed more rapidly, they're more productive, and they're more satisfied. So you are more likely to retain them. So actually, it's worth that investment. But I think it's putting that investment in that often is the challenge, because we're not used to doing that.
And there's a key thing that you've used in language, and I think this is something we need to shift internally. We need to start seeing it as an investment, not a cost. Yeah. All right. There's a lot of things where people, that costs that and that costs that. This is an investment. And we do know as well, the journey to learn how to support a returner is a journey to learn how to be a learning organization. And that is something that's not a one-off skill, one-off capability within a company. That transforms a whole company, because everyone, if you get that mindset, creating that mindset that everyone can upskill, everyone can refresh, they can move into things, it benefits everyone, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think what is interesting is quite a few of the employers that we work with, they put in some of these support structures for returners, and then people start to go, well, why aren't we doing that for other new joiners?
Exactly. There's a wonderful net benefit of any of these rethinking how to get into tech, that you start seeing it adds it's a value add for everyone within the organization, which again doubles down on that investment piece. Before we go into that support, is there anything else I should think? I like that you were talking about how do we attract and how do we assess. Have you seen any really clever ways and effective ways in which companies have rethought that assessment when they're looking at returners?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the approaches that works well is more of a sort of strengths-based approach. Now, some organizations have already been adopting that in their normal recruitment processes, so it's easier to transfer over. And I think that is really powerful, because you're not talking to people about what they have done recently. You're not so much focused on that competency-based approach. It's sort of less technical, but you're really trying to get out those underlying strengths and skills. And I think what can come out really powerfully there is the strengths and skills that people have developed during their career break from that life experience, as well as from before. And what is normally a very powerful and impressive career so many returners have had, and then they factor the skills, the life experience, the perspective, the empathy, all these things that they've built during their career break.
And you're right, again, it's transferable, because we hear that from our boot camps as well, which is looking at those wider skills, what we used to call, I hate that they're soft skills. They're the hardest damn piece of the puzzle. I've heard somebody starting to talk about them as the power skills, or whatever we call it. Looking at how you can try and assess that in candidates that benefits you with returners, because they're going to have that in spades, and those wider life skills are huge, and the resilience, all those things we're talking about. Assessing it is really, really hard, useful, and again, an investment more widely across what you're going to need to do in the space.
Yeah. And I think, if you adopt the approach, if you're looking at underlying skills, you can also take a technical lens on it. Because I think that's what, again, there is a bit of a risk if you start to talk about strengths-based interviewing and you're talking to somebody who's maybe a hiring manager in tech. I think, that sounds a bit fluffy. Sounds no, that's not going to be robust enough for me. But if you take that principle of looking at underlying strengths and skills, actually you can think, how can you assess that, even if it's in a technical case, or you're giving people information beforehand. I think one of the other key tips I'd like to say is give information. Yes. And I think, again, there is a bit of a shift of thinking generally, I'm finding, an assessment on this. Rather than thinking, we'll surprise people and we'll test them and we'll chuck things at them when they come in through the door. It's recognizing that doesn't necessarily bring the best out of people in any form of assessment process. But tell them, give them information before. If it's a case study, give them time to read it, to absorb it before they come in. If it's interviews, tell them a little bit about how the process is going to work. I mean, some organizations are actually doing pre-briefing sessions for returners. And they're giving them a little bit more information. They're giving them some more support. They're allowing them to ask questions. And again, just all with this mindset, we want them to perform at their best.
Yeah, and I think that's powerful, because again, that doesn't just help women, that doesn't just help returners. We know if you're trying to recruit people who are neurodiverse, we know that if you're trying to look at people who have language difficulties, this is, again, as we start unpacking it, it's like you say, it's the aha moment when we start asking ourselves, what is the benefit of trying to pretend it's like an exam hall? How often is work like an exam hall where you have to be ushered by yourself, no one can help you, you have to do it within a few seconds? That's not the workplace. And so we're not allowing them to show what they're best at, and we're not giving them the conditions that we have in the workplace. I mean, maybe somebody on the call has a company in which, no, all of our teams go and work in isolation, under pressure, with people watching. That's it. It's not what I'm hearing from the best in the teams. And so I'm hearing those pre-briefings, more information rather than less, setting context, allowing pre-interview prep to let people do the best for that assessment can give us. Let's imagine then that we have attracted, we have recruited, and we think we've got a great field. Now, is there anything that I should think about? What happens within the program? How do I make it effective for that onboarding? And in particular, what should I be doing with my line managers?
Yeah. And I think I'll start with the line manager piece, because I think that's a precursor to actually set any form of returner program up for success. I mean, I think we start with the conversations that are had with line managers right from the beginning are about the talent pool, and the fact this is a great talent pool. This isn't some form of DE&I initiative that is being pushed on you by HR, by senior leadership. This is a way of bringing in great talent that will actually add something complementary to your team. And I think, what we hear again and again from line managers is the value that returners bring in because of their career break, not despite their career break. Because they're coming in with fresh eyes, fresh perspective. Often, and again, let's say, if we come back to the aspect of people who had strong technical skills, they have then added on a wealth of relationship, communication, influencing skills from their career break, and they bring that back in together with a huge degree of enthusiasm, motivation. So we need to start by getting that message across to line managers from the beginning, so they feel excited and enthusiastic about it rather than, oh, this is all going to be a bit too hard. Yeah, so once you've got that enthusiasm, the next stage is then training of hiring managers before they're interviewing returners, so they are prepared that maybe this isn't going to be the slickest candidate, you know, they're maybe not going to be as polished, but actually we're looking at, can they do the job rather than are they skilled, unpolished interviewees? Yeah. So I think it's trying to differentiate those two things and thinking, how can I work with a returner candidate in the interview process to support them? So again, typically then, if that's worked well, they've got the engagement, they've got a bit of an understanding. So then they've got the returner coming into their team. And that's where we give training sessions to line managers, a bit of a briefing on how to understand and support a returner when they come in. And this is hard. And as we say, this is one of the challenges as a hiring manager, because you're like, I'm used to experienced hires who come straight in from elsewhere. I'm used to maybe a graduate who, you know, they're coming in at very junior levels, or even somebody who's retrained who's a bit older, but they're coming in at junior levels. I'm bringing somebody into my team, they're at this mid to senior level, but they need a bit more time and a bit more support up front. So typically they want to support, but they're not sure how to do it. But it's very reassuring for a hiring manager if they know that this has all been thought through. So the training we give them is how to understand the psychology of a returner and how to practically support them. And
so this, if I lean in on this point, and this is something I'm getting more and more passionate about. If I think back over the last 5 years, the number of times I've heard, and I've been part of, middle manager bashing, right? Oh, the C-suite get it. Oh, we've got aggressive, but oh, those middle managers, what are we going to do? Oh, my hiring managers. And what are we doing to help take them on the journey? And I think this training and support is vital. And every program I'm hearing about that we're looking through, providing the training and support. Now, I'd suggest, and I think you probably agree, Jan, that when we think about, if I were kicking this off within my company, I'd probably choose those people carefully. I'd want to look at somebody who's a little more enthusiastic at the start and get my success stories, rather than the person that goes, now prove to me, I'm just looking to trip them up. But even for that person who seems keen, training and support, and then as you get the success stories, the training and the support and success, you know, I think is really important to make that happen.
Yeah. And, you know, one of the most powerful ways of scaling and growing a program is where the line managers are saying, this was brilliant. You know, they then become the advocates in future years.
So when we talk about going back to that triumvirate, pick your willing, pick your most enthusiastic in the first bit. And again, I'm always happier when I hear about a company talking about, we're going to pilot something rather than we're going to roll it out. We're going to bring in 100, you know, it's that sort of start small to figure out how it fits within your company. Pick those enthusiasts, grow it, get your learnings, then you go bigger.
Yeah. And actually, this is one of the things I love about working with the tech sector, because I think it absolutely feeds into a tech mindset.
Yeah.
You know, that you trial something, you don't start with the perfect product, you trial it, you pilot, you learn, you iterate. And I think that's exactly the mindset. Don't try and make it perfect up, because you won't. You will not make it perfect up front. You know, we have now worked on hundreds of returner programs, and they're never, ever perfect. However much you put in up front, it's a learning for the organization. You can't make people perfect in a system. We all know that, don't we?
And it is, remember, and like you said, but this is, and I think sometimes you're right, in tech it should be second nature, but sometimes we have to remind people. I was speaking at an event a fortnight ago and talking about it. It was watching that aha moment when I was saying to people, but remember, we're tech. We're supposed to be able to innovate, start small, fail. And there was that, oh yeah. But somehow, you know, we shift into that old mindset of, well, this is recruitment. We do recruitment. This is, it's perfect. And actually, once you cut people free to see, we're going to innovate this, we're going to co-create it, we're going to bring that through, it brings an ease and an excitement to a process rather than that, oh God, this is going to be hard. That's not usually how we approach things in tech.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think it's giving that sort of business lens you have in tech and putting that onto this program or any other sort of HR type program, which often is perceived.
Well, beyond the line manager, is there anything else within the environment that I could think about that I'd want to be setting up?
Yeah. Well, let me talk about the support we give to the returners, because I think that's the next key bit. And we talk about giving the returners a support team. So what effectively, because we don't want all the pressure again to be on the hiring manager to be everything to this person. So as women returners, when we partner with organizations, we have a career returners coaching program. And I say career returners because it's very important. It's not women returners if we do have men coming in as well. And what that does is that supports returners through this psychological transition back. So it's taking you, some of the challenges when you're first coming in are very practical. You know, when you start a new job, what's the first thing? You meet somebody new and what do they say to you? They say, oh, where do you come from? As a returner, that's actually the hardest question. Do I talk about my career break? Do I say, well, I was doing this 10 years ago? You know, how do I do that? So we help the returners, even before they get out there in their teams, to introduce themselves in a very credible, confident way, not to hide their career break, to defend it, to apologize for it, but just to make it part of their story and their narrative, to feel really comfortable about it, but also to talk about what they did before. And to own that and what they're doing now. And just that bit about being able to tell your story makes people feel so much stronger coming into a team, and also makes them come across better. So, and then we help them to understand that they have, you know, these fears and doubts they are having are completely normal, how to handle them, what sort of attitudes work, how to prepare. For those who do have sort of still existing family commitments, which is a chunk, how to start managing that, maybe how to have objectives for how your family is going to manage with this transition back just as much as you. So it's very much thinking that holistic perspective.
Fantastic.
So that's the, and what we do, if you do have a cohort joining, we do that together. So it builds a really nice sense of peer support, which is the other thing that is really valued by returners. Recognize for smaller organizations that's not possible, and you may just be bringing in the odd returner, but for larger organizations you can bring, even if it's 3 people at once, that's a really nice feel. And then that coaching program takes the returners through. And typically the next session is the 4 to 6 week wobble, where you're like, I'm failing, massive imposter syndrome, I can't do this. Normalizes that experience, gets them past it. You know, a couple of months in, typically 3 months in, most returners are flying, a few aren't, but a lot are looking forward. So again, it's supporting where they are in that transition. And then typically final one is 6 months, and that's a real, again, that's another identity transition from I'm a returner to actually I'm back in here now, and it's great, and I can move on from that. So that's important. So that's the coaching piece. There's then training, and I think again the element of training that is required very much depends on the role you're bringing returners into. You know, if you're bringing them into a very technical role as opposed to something like, you know, project management, business analysis, different levels. So that will depend. But I think that training piece is important. And then there is the generalized training piece with actually most returners can benefit just from an upfront sessions on your internal tech, which could be anything like using Microsoft Office, using your internet, whatever it is, things like that. Even with tech returners, that can trip them up.
And almost more so. There's nothing, I mean, well, look at any of us when we're trying to jump on a Zoom call and it doesn't work, how much that throws you, because if you're in tech, it's extra salt in the wound if it doesn't work. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then again, sort of final, you know, couple of bits of the support team. We do recommend all returners have a buddy, and we now know a lot of organizations for new joiners have a buddy. That's somebody in your team. You can ask those, how do I do it kind of questions too. and then a mentor, and particularly organizations who have a mentoring culture, somebody who is outside of your line management structure, who can just help you navigate the organization. So again, depends on the scale of program and scale of organization, how much of that support team you can put in. But I think starting with that as the ideal and then adapting it for your organization means that the returner very much feels set up for success. And I think if they feel that, you stand a really, really high likelihood of bringing them in and keeping them in.
And everything you've just described there, I can hear and see how we could be using that to make our companies inclusive for other entry schemes, other people from different backgrounds. And so again, investment in this kind of thinking, this kind of training and onboarding becomes something that it's an investment into something that may help you across all of your lines in doing that.
Yeah, one of the things, just an example of that, I mean, doesn't every organization have its acronyms and its abbreviations? And one of the things we said for returners up front is create a bit of an online dictionary, which is, this is what everybody says. And a lot of organizations have started to use that now for other new joiners, if they have it already, because it's so daunting. Sometimes it's like a whole new language, isn't it? You need to learn.
And it is, this is why it's so great to start on one lens, one part of the piece of the puzzle to becoming more inclusive, because what you find in removing the barriers for one, you start removing the barriers for all in that space. Now, is there anything else I should think? Because what we want this to be, if I'm going to set up a returners program, I want it to be sustainable. I want it to be ongoing. Is there anything else I should be thinking about in order to make sure this is as impactful, as sustainable as it can be for my company?
Yeah, I think if you are creating a program, as opposed to just bringing in a few ad hoc returners, for a program, you really need a program manager or a couple of program managers. You need to have somebody who owns it, who builds up that learning knowledge, who coordinates with everybody, and who is able to take that learning mindset and come together at the end and say, how does this work to evolve it? And some of the most successful programs we've worked on have had real continuity of program managers. It might be the same person that they've had for 5 or 6 years, or it may be there's been a very effective handover and transfer of knowledge. But I think that bit is important, because I think if it just relies on this somehow happening with recruitment, it gets lost. And it doesn't get that momentum, and it all feels a bit difficult, and everybody's trying to do it off the side of the desk, and it becomes, it gets lost.
So somebody needs to own it, because like you said, this isn't traditional. It's building that team around. It's a multi-thread. So we want to make sure that we try and build that in.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to the people on the call, if anyone has questions, start throwing them in. I have a few more questions I want to start asking, Jeanette. I'm far from over, but if you want to start asking about any questions for yourself or share what you're doing in your own company, this is a great time to start doing that. Can I ask, in terms of, are there certain roles within tech that this has been more successful, less successful? If I were in a larger company and thinking about kind of roles, is there a type of role I should look at that might give me the greatest chance for success?
I think some of the most straightforward roles, at least to start with, and again, it's where we're talking about starting with maybe the slightly easier aspects and building on it. I think one of the easiest starting points is with a role like a program manager or a business analyst. Those sort of roles where you need an understanding of the technical aspects, but actually you are more managing technical people, interfacing between tech and the business, pulling people together. So you're using a mix of those, we're not using the word soft skills, those broader skills, as well as your understanding of tech, but it's not reliant on you having incredibly, you can build and update and refresh your technology over time, rather than that being something that is vitally necessary for you to do your role. So I think those roles have worked well. However, we also have a number of people who have been coming back into areas like sort of software development. To one of the things that has been interesting is some of the newer areas like cybersecurity, where there's such huge demand for people, and actually, it's an area where you can bring in returners who have tech knowledge and upskill them, because you're going to have to upskill people anyway. So actually, interestingly, new areas of tech where your returners can maybe leapfrog, they go from what they had before, and they've maybe leapfrogged the development, and they're getting in this new area and understanding. That can be really powerful. I can see, Chelsea, you've got your hand up.
Thank you. And actually, it was interesting. I put it up just as you mentioned cybersecurity, which is one of the main things that I'm trying to focus on. And I feel like I might be going slightly left field on this, but what I want to do is apply the returner principles to help out our cybersecurity team, but in a slightly different way. Yeah. We have got. So definitely to attract returners, but also to attract industry movers. We seem to have a real problem within insurance and I imagine other financial services, that unless you've grown up in that space, it's quite hard to jump back in. And our cybersecurity, we have cyber insurance underwriters who don't actually need to be technical, but we seem to expect them to grow up in the insurance industry. So one of the ideas that we're playing with is offering internship programs, and I can't think of a word for them, that might be returnship, but as well as opening it up to people who've left the sector who want to come back in, is opening it up to people in academia or in the civil services who are trying to transition into our sector. And so I'm interested in your thoughts on that. But the other question I was going to ask is around work patterns. I would imagine, working in I&D, that going straight into another full-time, say you're returning or you are trying to transition or whatever, going into a full-time 5 days a week, even if it's remote or not, is probably quite a shock to the system. Is it better to have a graduated approach into, to start with 2 or 3 days a week of work? Sorry, I've given you all my life problems there.
2 questions.
I do that to Debbie all the time.
let me split up thoughts into 2. So I think because they are sort of slightly different. Start with the first one. I mean, I think this idea of, it's a bit more of a retraining. Let me just talk about the terminology, because I think it's helpful here. We tend to think in terms of returner programs. There are a couple of different types of returner programs where you are bringing back in people who have been working in pretty much doing the job before, but they've got so you're aiming to bring them back in at mid to senior levels because they need a bit of a refresh, but they can take that level. So, and that's typically either the classic one is the returnship, where returners are coming in, they're doing the job for sort of 4 to 6 months. They have this support alongside, and the idea is we want to get 75, 80, often 90 or 100% of them through into ongoing roles. That's a returnship. The second way is what we call supported hiring. So you're bringing the returners again into those mid to senior level roles with the same wrapper of support, but they're coming into a permanent role. And then there is another form, and actually this is becoming increasingly popular, is saying this is a really valuable group in terms of just broader skills, are transferable skills and experience, even if they might have worked in a very different area of STEM, or they might have just been, say, maths teachers or, something like that. Or they could be just have that analytical mindset. Maybe you've come from financial services and we bring them into tech and they've got that maturity and perspective. And that's like a retraining program. And that's what we call them. And a lot of this is so the returners are clear on what they're signing up for. Are you trying to, because our mission is removing the career break penalty. So what I don't want to do is to work with employers to create programs where we're saying, you've got to start again effectively.
Yeah.
So if you have that skills and experience, we only want people starting at a more junior level if actually they are training and it's something different. So again, that's that principle. So
if I just comment on it, because I want to pull that out and say, let's put that back in those early concepts to bottom out what you're trying to do at the start, because I think it's important to have the clarity within the company what you're doing and with your managers and externally. And it's not that you don't want to do those things, but it's understanding. So you're designing courses for courses. And so what we're looking at when we say returners programs is we're bringing someone back who had previous some kind of vaguely, but with a goal to get them mid and senior. So we're removing the penalty. It's not putting them at the bottom of the ladder again. Is that the way we describe that?
The umbrella term of returner programs we use as any targeted recruitment initiative focused at career returners. So there would be, under that, you have the returnship and the supported hiring program, which is mid to senior levels, but you can also have a retraining program.
So
that would be a returner program if you're targeting it at returners, but you might also have, we've got returners coming in on retraining programs where they might be coming in alongside graduates or career changers, but they are a different group that you're bringing in.
But what I'm hearing then is you need to do your thinking ahead of time for you to get the most out of it, for it not to risk burning people or have a bad experience. Think through what you will, what you won't do, what you are, what you're not looking through, etc. But then, as Chelsea was saying, as you get skills in this way of thinking, this way of training and onboarding, that becomes highly transferable and allows you to tackle problem areas like cyber. If you take that learning, lift it up, figure out, and it's always, again, what do we call it? We'll figure that out, but let's figure out what it is. Then we'll come up with a cunning name that we can market.
Exactly. And it's the, what's your business need? And so if you want to be bringing people in at those, if you're saying we want more women or more diversity at mid to senior levels, that maybe directs you from a business need more towards the returnship or the supported hiring. If you're saying, actually, we just want to bring people, we need more people into an area like cybersecurity, and we're happy whatever level they come in at, and we recognize it's pretty hard to bring them in at mid to senior levels because it's hard to find, it's a relatively new area, so you're less likely to get experienced returners in cyber. It's more likely to be,
and it's useful to do that. And on both of those, I think the one thing I would hear, I do remember talking to one company once, and they were talking about, we've got this terrible problem, we've had trouble with managers in the team, and so we're going to bring a returners program. And it was just kind of a, please don't start there, please don't. So I think it's about understanding burning need, understanding the business need, but not necessarily piloting something in the toughest part, the worst part, because that's the recipe for disaster.
Exactly. Or there is a role here which has been impossible to fill, so we'll put it in the returners program.
Because that's got to do. You're just setting it up. And then the second question about the flexible start and everything.
I mean, I think what is really important is to talk about what flexibility is on offer from point of hire. This is part of this broader conversation about flexible hiring. There's a lot going on about this at the moment. So what we want you as an organization to be doing, and this is also important because when you're setting this up, you do not want to create any resentment for your existing employees by somehow giving special terms to that's an important thing to think about. We want
don't set them up as the boffin, right? Don't set them up as the special kid.
Exactly, because then if I'm sitting in a team going, well, I came back maybe after maternity leave and I wasn't offered part-time working, and now suddenly this return, that is not going to work. But I think what happens in most organizations, and this is now, again, the change with where you get that flexibility that we're all sort of hopefully celebrating this week, is that now those conversations will be had from the beginning, from recruitment, of talking about flexibility. And so it's talking about what forms of flexible working are on offer for the team. How will they work for you as a returner? And creating that sort of, you want to create a match between what's on offer within the team and what the returner's looking for. So part-time is the classic. It's always a bit of a holy grail for so many people coming into new employers. They think, well, it'd be fantastic if I can work 4 days a week. If that's on offer, great. If that's not on offer, then again, make that clear up front.
Yeah. And I think it's important to consider that, because we've heard that from boot camps as well, where boot camps have gone out of their way on the training programs to offer flexible training. Yeah. And then it gets to point of office where employers go, no, 100% face-to-face in the office, and wondering why they're not getting the hires they want. So it is about, but it's about company-wide thinking through, what can you do? But I think there's an interesting point. I've had some companies, and we were talking with some of our principal partner, a lot say that initial induction, initial onboarding needs more time, not less, needs more face-to-face. So it's worth these companies to think that through and willing to say, do we pay a little more? Do we offer a little bit more to get them in for a period? I mean, what are your thoughts on how important is face-to-face and in office when we're trying to onboard somebody?
It's tricky, isn't it? Because I think there are huge advantages for many returners to being able to work from home. And I think the number that now suddenly the proliferation of remote opportunities. So it's hygiene now for most companies. Yeah. We're working with the very group on a returner program in tech, and a lot of their roles are fully remote, so you can be based anywhere. And that's fantastic in terms of the reach you can get to people. However, the downside is you need to put a lot of structure in then in terms of the support to allow them to feel included, to be able to ask the questions, to feel involved. So I think those organizations where if you want people to be based, if you're the way you've shifted maybe as an organization is it's either ideally hybrid, hopefully hybrid, rather than fully in the office 5 days a week. I think most organizations it's some form of hybrid. Then that can be a fantastic mix for a returner in. Absolutely. But it does need to be. One of the things that we have been hearing a bit from returners working on a hybrid basis is they come into the office and they're all excited and then nobody's there.
It's the case. It is. And I think it's where companies are getting it right, is to think coming in has a purpose, right? So if you're in the office, it's because your team's in the office, or there's just something on, etc. Julian, I'm always aware that for some of my signatories, they're an SME, they're a startup. Is it possible to do a returnship, a returners program if I'm a smaller company? How could I make that work?
Yeah, I think there are two options. One of the things that we have been trying to build up is the idea of a cross-company programme. And we're currently running one with some Scottish Government funding up in Scotland. And that gives an opportunity for SMEs as well as larger companies to come in and have you work with other organisation. You get economies of scale. The returners get a bit of a peer group. So even if you're only bringing 2 returners, so that model is great. And I'd like to do more of that. But I think, so that's one thing, just keep an eye out if there is, we did one in fintech as well, and we'd like to get that going again. So if there's any interest, I think, in a few employers working together, that's a really nice way of bringing in SMEs. I think beyond that, probably you need to think less about a program and more just how can I make my recruitment more returner friendly and my onboarding more returner friendly. And I think because inevitably you will probably need to just integrate it into your business as usual recruiting. But it's also, again, it's some of the principles that we've talked about, Debbie, about finding the areas, the teams who are behind this, the hiring managers, working with them and doing something smaller scale, just to even put on your adverts, we welcome applications from people who've had a career break.
It is that. It's sometimes things as simple as that.
Yeah.
Listen, thank you so much. I'm assuming that there's not any more questions. I'm always mindful. I always want to finish on time or a little bit early at a crazy, crazy time of year. It's always nice to have a few sneaky minutes left back to ourselves. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us. And listen, love what you're doing at Women Returners. Love that you've developed this, and love to see the market starting to catch up with you, and that appreciate how valuable it is what you do. Thank you to those of you who have joined on the call. I hope this isn't your last forum that you're going to join with us. There's a number, some of you are starting to come up again and again and get your gold star as a forum regular. If there's a topic that you'd like to talk about on one of our sessions, or a topic you want us to have someone to talk about, please let us know. But otherwise, we'll send out, there's other resources we have around returner programs. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Julianne. And thank you to everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.